Yeah, hi, Greg. It's great to great to be in this conversation with you.
Hey Paul, how's it going?
So tell me a bit more about Rafiki. Where are you at currently and what are you trying to achieve in the world?
Cool. I will give you the high-level overview. Just interrupt me if you've got any questions. But
Of course.
I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I moved across to London bang on 2 years ago to work in another early stage startup. I'd always worked in early stage startup,
Mm,
but being involved with the ecosystem here was the first time I realized how many of the international startups outsource a huge chunk of their workflows, predominantly in the form of development and design. And
mm,
my position at the startup entailed managing a lot of these different agencies or freelancers, and they were basically placed everywhere in the world, bar South Africa or anywhere in Africa, really. And that frustrated me and got me start researching and talking to a whole bunch of founders or heads of recruitments or team managers within the early stage startup scene in the UK. And there was always a big question mark over Africa in general, and a sort of sense of, I guess, potential stigma or taboo around the quality. And that
mm,
frustrated me because I knew how good the talent is back home. Case in point, yourself, we've worked together on various projects, and it's world-class talent that's seemingly untapped or struggling to find the right international exposure and break into the right work that isn't just gig to gig based project work, but more on a sort of fractional ongoing basis that blurs the
mm,
lines between being purely freelance and having that full-time sort of job security that a full-time job would allow. So we started playing around with recruitment of
mm,
developers, junior developers coming straight out of Lewagen and We Think Code, the online boot camps. There was a lot
mm,
of interest from both sides of our marketplace. So our marketplace, the supply side, is very much the talent in Africa, and the demand is anyone looking for that talent. And both sides had a lot of interest, but there was a sort of uncertainty around startups here getting placed with various developers without having someone managing them or vetting them on a sort of end-to-end basis. So what
mm,
we did is move more into a freelancer agency. I've never worked in an agency or been a freelancer myself, so there were a lot of learning curves there that we can touch on just now. And we moved slightly away from development and more into product design. So I would go out and
mm,
find various startups or founders that I knew needed, brand guidelines done, or corporate identity, or websites, or even mock-ups for apps. And then we would go back into our sort of talent network, predominantly South Africans at the time. It's evolved a little bit since then, and find the right designers, and then project manage them on behalf of the clients. A lot of the time, the clients wouldn't even see who was kind of behind the scenes. And that picked up quite quickly to the point where I could move from my full-time position and move into Rafiki. And my
mm,
co-founder managed to do so a few months afterwards. And we used that agency basically as a vehicle to really understand the freelancer economy. And the more we learned about it, the more we realized how many problems and how many opportunities were in the space, for both sides, for talent back home and for modern day startups trying to explore the use of contingent workers, but not really getting it right. Um,
mm,
and that's basically evolved now into another side of Rafiki as a business, and that's the product that we're building out, which is basically some form of CRM that has various sort of project management tools embedded into it that are very focused on contingent workforces, so freelancers, fractional experts, sort of specialist consultants, and how
mm,
they can essentially de-risk the relationship when approaching various clients, and vice versa, how clients independent of Rafiki's talent marketplace could bring in their own freelancers, but by using our services really take a de-risked approach to those relationships, because we've seen time and time again that things like scope creep and the flow of cash and cash flow and payments are often related to scope creep, but not necessarily sort of exclusive to that, are
mm.
the biggest pain points when working with freelancers. So that's very high level what we're doing, and we can obviously dive a bit deeper into what it is we're doing and why in subsequent questions, but hopefully that gives you kind of a basic gist of what we're up to.
Yes, totally does. And I mean, it's incredibly ambitious, and it's also really needed, right? I mean, I recently saw a statistic that Africa holds 10% of the world's freelancers, which that's a big number considering the population in Africa and the skill set that's sort of coming out of there. You mentioned that the UK is sort of looking for or these type of opportunities would actually benefit clients in the UK. So tell me a bit more about what you've seen from a statistics perspective, just to get to the numbers to understand why this is actually a lucrative business.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you nailed it in terms of Africa's got, one of the fastest growing youth populations in the world. And the freelancer economy, or just sort of freelancer platforms, or freelancing in general for sort of tech startups, is fairly nascent in nature in Africa, but it's changing very quickly. And what's encouraging to see is that with the releases of various softwares and sort of online boot camps and sort of DIY upskilling of various skills that people are now able to do, provided they've got internet, has meant that there's this sort of unbundling of traditional colleges and tertiary educations, and that often now those aren't required in order for someone to land a really, really solid job in a great startup, in the UK or in the States, coming out of Nigeria or Kenya or South Africa. And I think what we're seeing now is this boom in youth population who are currently getting really interested in freelancing and cottoning on to the fact that if they are hungry and they are intelligent, they can upskill themselves very quickly to the point where they can forge their own full-time career freelancing, as opposed to it just being a side gig that they use to earn money in addition to their full-time position. So I think statistically we're seeing, I think in the UK, around 70% of UK businesses plan to expand their use of contingent workers over the next 5 years. And we're seeing similar stats in the US. And there's a few reasons for that. But ultimately, I think number one is businesses are being forced to become a lot more lean. And what we're seeing is startups, full-time team sizes are shrinking, and the use of contingent workforces in the form of freelancer consultancies are increasing. And that's, I think, also a kind of follow-on from a period where there was a lot of oversupply of money in venture capital, and a lot of startups raised huge amounts of money and hired flats out and hired a lot of sort of middle management tiers in terms of team structure. And ultimately, what's happening now is that's the sort of venture capital market is starting to dry up, or has over the last few years. And in order to get funding, you need to prove that your little team is, super optimal at getting to where you want to be without having to hire multiple layers of middle management. So where that affects freelancers is obviously the use in more sort of contingent workforces. So very, very cool for the African youth. I think it, makes things like access to international opportunities a lot less exclusive to people who went to rich, or not rich, but, fairly unaffordable tertiary education. Which is great to see, and an awesome opportunity for all of our freelancers back home in SA.
I mean, of course, yeah. The internet has really expanded the world and brought us all way closer together. And I think a lot of people are realizing, listen, there's a lot of untapped talent. And yeah, there's this concept that I've heard you mention before of fractional talent. Can you maybe expand a bit more on what that actually means? You already said, less middle management positions, etc.
Yeah. So traditionally, the term fractional talent was more focused on sort of C-suite positions. So things like a fractional CFO or CMO were evident in the startup scene. And that's ultimately a form of freelancing, but usually a highly skilled freelancer, mid to very senior, with very specific domain expertise as well, in addition to whatever they are able to do on a hands-on sort of individual contribution and sort of execution standpoint. So as an example, there might be a really senior product designer who has very verticalized niche experience in fintech or in payments, and they would be brought in on a much longer term basis as opposed to a project to project basis. So a company might sign with them for 12 months, 24 months, whatever it is, and then working for alongside sort of varying degrees of commitment into those companies. So anything from 5 hours a week to 20, 30 hours a week. And we use this model a lot. From a business standpoint, it means that you can often get access to really solid skill specific, domain specific expertise for a fraction of the cost, while still being able to kind of scale up and down your team as and when the business needs, as opposed to going through these long-winded hiring processes, which are a huge risk, incredibly timely, incredibly costly for most businesses, especially if you're a cashed up startup, right? And so that's what we mean by fractional. It's really the sort of blend between traditional freelancing and sort of more senior long-term full-time hiring.
Okay, it makes total sense. And, it's a great business case for these companies who just need these skills on, an ad hoc basis, right?
Yeah,
And the fact that they can easily get that, and that Rafiki is aiming to make that accessible and also vetted, so people know they're getting proper talent. They don't have to
yeah,
work with, the big corporate consultancies who usually are a lot more expensive, and those contracts are quite big.
yeah.
Um, but then there also are some challenges and things to consider when working with small agencies or with freelancers.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are some of those things that have come up for you? And then we'll move on over to the freelancer side of things.
Yeah, 100%. I think in terms of potential pain points or things to be aware of from a client standpoint, as a founder or team lead looking to hire freelancers, is really taking a step back and objectively trying to drill down and validate your assumptions in terms of your hypothesized needs for hiring X, Y, or Z freelancer. We've seen this a lot with Rafiki as an agency, and when placing individual or teams of freelancers or fractional experts into in-house teams, startup teams. A lot of the time, companies think they need someone, and they haven't really done full due diligence internally and done a workshop, potentially in partnership with the freelancer that they're contemplating bringing on board, to really understand and get the business and the team internally ready to embed that freelancer. And if you do
Mm,
that, and if you get that right, it's going to attract much higher quality freelancers. And I think what we're seeing, and this is probably exactly your process, Paul, is as a senior freelancer, you wouldn't approach a project without having that, because it
mm,
mitigates potential risks like scope creep down the
yeah.
line. So being very overly sort of communicative about that from both sides, um, I think is probably what I would say is the number one issue to address when looking to potentially bring on board any form of freelance or teams of freelancers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to note. Is you need to know that the decision you're making is the right one, and you're getting the right person. Is
Yeah.
that something that Rafiki is also going to help these companies with? Is that the idea?
Yeah, definitely. So at the moment, we're very focused more on the sort of product design and marketing and development side. So we've got
Mm,
various tests in place on the development side through our CTO. We run them through various tests based on their skill stack, and then we have qualitative interviews and some sort of vetting process like that.
mm,
Um, and we're busy rolling those out in partnership with various freelancers we call experts in residency, such as yourself, Paul, that will help us in vetting the right talent. And we're really taking quite a curated, closed approach to Rafiki's talent marketplace. We will never be an open marketplace such as Upwork or Fiverr.
mm,
We've had issues, and the research we've done shows tremendous frustration from the talent side in using those platforms. They have
mhm,
limited exposure. They do very little to kind of prioritize newcomers to those platforms. There's a liquidity issue across those marketplaces. They provide work for less than 4% of people on those platforms. So a lot of churn, very little loyalty to those platforms. And obviously,
mhm,
Rafiki isn't just a talent marketplace, but at the moment, it's a core vertical to our business because it allows us to keep exploring and basically using the talent marketplace to validate assumptions we have for the larger vision product. And we'll forever keep it small. I mean, at the end of the year, we'll probably only have onboarded between 50 and 100 freelancers that we feel
mm,
comfortable enough to place on any given client. That's from about 500 applications. So really trying to keep it small, and only grow the marketplace as and when we can prove that we can grow the liquidity of the actual platform and provide work.
mm.
Otherwise, there's not much point from us, and it's a sort of short-term game.
I love that. It's almost like applying for a job in a sense, but you can be a freelancer. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the reliable, vetted clients, even
Yeah,
from a freelancer's perspective, and the clients obviously get a workforce that they know will be able to deliver on what they actually need. So,
100%.
yeah, I mean, I've been freelancing over 6 years now. my first gig was in 2018, and you know, it's taken 6 years to really understand and through hard learnings and growth to know how to manage clients and to know how to put certain checks in place. And a lot of
Mm,
freelancers who are just starting out and they need to make a living might not be doing that. So some of the biggest issues that I've come across is making sure that the client has a clear project scope, as you
mm,
mentioned earlier, because scope creep happens, and how do you deal with that?
mm.
Things like inconsistent communication or struggling to get payments out of clients. What are some of those biggest issues and pain points that you've seen freelancers actually experience? I know you've touched on some of them
Mm.
before.
I think it's exactly those, Paul. It's that sort of miscommunication. I think a lot of the time, and it'd be great to get your opinion on this, having
Mm,
worked with a lot of founders. I think we're trying to embed a lot of fractional talent into early-ish stage startups or SMBs, where that often means there's direct communication or interaction with the founders of those companies. And I think for the most part, founders are quite passionate people,
mm,
and they can come across as, you know, potentially quite sort of have a sort of micromanagement style. And it's not because they want to
mm,
micromanage, it's just because this is their baby. A lot of the time it's make or break, there's skin in the game, and they want things to go well.
mm,
So I think being able to navigate that from both sides as a founder, to realize that you may be coming across quite in a strong manner when working with freelancers, and ensuring that freelancers feel embedded into your full-time team, and don't treat them as a freelancer, treat them as an extension to your team on an ongoing basis. Otherwise, the right work and that sort of alignment is never going to actually result in solid work. So it'd be good to get your take on working with founders, no doubt some that have been very passionate, around how you actually navigate that and how do you deal with
mm.
difficulty in communication.
Yeah, listen, I love working with founders. That's sort of my number one person to work with. And it's because of that passion. They have
Mm,
this dream. A lot of the times they've put up their life savings, they've, quit their jobs, they're starting this new thing. And it's high stakes, it's make or break. I always say, when working with the client, that they probably put a lot of their own money into this, right? So I need to make that money count. I need to deliver the value for that money. So, firstly, as a
mm,
freelancer, just understanding that mindset, knowing that this isn't someone who's just playing around or who's just doing a job. They are actually, um, you know, they have skin in the game.
mm,
And I mean, it's the other way around, the same thing, right? Freelancers don't just work and earn a salary. You
mm,
need to, everything you do brings in your bread and butter. So it's a lot of strong personalities together, and that
mm,
can either create friction and a fire, or it can create friction, but in a good way, where it sort of leads to magic happening. And it's very easy to do that. It's pretty similar to any human relationship, and that's
mm,
really establishing the set of values and also the communication style, cadence, and expectations up front, right?
mm,
So it's better to over communicate rather than under communicate, and also make boundaries very clear. You need to set up a proper way of work. How long, do you expect someone to reply to an email? You need to have a proper project plan from the beginning. You need to have the clause that states, how do we deal with scope changes? Because with founders, the scope always increases, and that's not a bad thing. You want them to dream and explore, but then just when that happens, they need to know how it will be dealt with. And if those things are in place from the start, and you deliver on what you said in the project plan in terms of timelines and keep them up to date, bring them into the process. If you're doing user interviews, have them sit and observe them with you so they can, see the people being passionate about what they are passionate about.
yeah.
Then it's just a recipe for success. Obviously, sometimes, if there's a big value mismatch, things don't work out. But
Mm.
usually that's why an initial introduction call is crucial for both parties to decide, is this a personality fit or not? So, yeah, that's sort of what I've seen. Anything else that you've noticed that you want to add to that?
No, I think you touched on a really good point around the fact that scope creep isn't necessarily a bad thing, and it can be a very positive thing and a really great opportunity, provided, as you say, you've got those sort of contingent plans in place from the get-go as to how both parties actually approach that. So I think that's, I can't emphasize how important that is for freelancers and founders. So I think also quite interesting, and I think for the most part, this is why a lot of more senior freelancers work really well in early stage startups, because
Mm,
most freelancers, in effect, are very entrepreneurial, right? Out of competitive necessity of being a freelancer, you have to
mm,
be able to sell yourself and understand concepts and industries really quickly in order to close the deal. Because chances are that whether you're a freelancer or a small independent agency owner, whoever your prospect client is, they're going to be talking to and comparing you to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other freelancers or agencies. So I think that's quite an interesting point, and something we're seeing a lot, in that a lot of our freelancers coming into the platform are actually becoming clients by asking us to help them create their own teams or pop-up agencies so that they can close larger clients. We've seen
mm,
this rise in what you'd call solopreneurship, so basically just solo founders, which traditionally has been marked as a bit of a red flag, especially from like a venture capital standpoint, because they see that as solo founders' inability to convince someone or be likable enough to the point where they can have a team of, you know, other co-founders to build the
mm,
business, and because it's really difficult, and you want those complementary skill sets and someone to kind of drag you along the really difficult entrepreneurial journey. But I think due to sort of economic downturns, people have started to really want to create their own opportunities, so they've started testing out freelancing on the side, and then if they're good at that and they've picked up a few good clients, they move into it full time. And I think that, combined with the rise of sort of AI efficiency and all these latest tools, have really empowered freelancers or solopreneurs, solo founders, to do what a team of 2 or 3 founders and a small team of 2 or 3, you know, early stage startup employees can do as a single entity, which is really exciting.
mm,
And I think due to that competitive nature of being a freelancer, they stay ahead of the curve with the latest releases in software and tech. So they make them sort of super competitive compared to full-time employees who, if they've been in a position for very long, can potentially become a bit sort of apathetic or behind on the latest trends. So yeah, another interesting point around the use of freelancers and founders and that overlap.
100%. And that's a great reason to, um, if you're a company and you're not sure if this is a full-time position, try it out with a freelance and see,
Exactly.
how it goes. And you'll probably get a stronger skill set, through that experience. And you touched on some of these technological advancements that have actually allowed this industry to grow and to flourish. You mentioned that generative AI is really helping a lot. And I mean, I've seen that it's improved my productivity tenfold. I'm by
Mm,
default not a great writer. I'm better at articulating things visually or through pictures, right? That's how I learned always. And now I'm able to really express my thoughts in a way that captures the imagination of people a lot better, or
mm,
sifting through a lot of user research data, or assisting with research, getting started on projects. So that's ways I've implemented that into my skill set. What other sort of technologies and tools do you think? Obviously, these change constantly, so we can
mm.
categorize them maybe. But what are these essential tools that actually enable this sort of collaboration that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it varies very much according to the sort of skill set, but generally, I think a move towards low code or no code solutions,
Mm,
and easy plugins and integrations and automations, which cross between design, development, even marketing. And so now, designers such as yourself, who, okay, maybe you're a bad example because I know you do have front end development experience, but a designer without any coding experience can now fairly easily create their designs in Figma and incorporate that via Relume or Framer or whatever integration they want into
mm,
a live website that traditionally would have required a developer. And then on top of that, they can start creating various automations or using something like Zapier to create a fairly complex sort of drip campaign for CRM, bolts on for your clients. And now suddenly you've gone
mm,
from being a freelance designer to being the guy or girl who designs, develops, and rolls out the first marketing campaign for your client, which is really interesting, right? In terms of the collaboration tools, that's something you mentioned. I think it kind of ties into a trend we're seeing in the freelancer economy and the platforms, so to speak, in that traditionally they've been built for one-on-one gig-styled work. And they've sort of fallen behind the fact that a lot of freelancers organically, because there aren't the platforms that really facilitate this well, are creating their own pods of freelancers as pop-up agencies with their immediate network. At the moment, I know Upwork and Fiverr and a few of the big platforms have tried to roll things out, but pretty unsuccessfully because they haven't really been focused on the utility that freelancers need out of collaboration and the value proposition in the eyes of talent. And it's been very focused on the client in the form of looking for the right freelancers. So that's something we're very focused on in Rafiki, is how do we create, you know, the right sourcing and matching and connecting and collaborating and actual creation of projects between, you know, a handful of freelancers. And then how do we help them with, let's say there's a lead freelancer on that team, actually manage the flow of payment. From a client standpoint, there's a single payment that gets held in escrow and gets distributed into, you know, various freelancers across, let's say, Africa, that traditionally would have had difficulty receiving funds, and cross-border payments and international remittance. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for freelancers in Africa to start collaborating to close larger deals and ultimately increase their earnings. Not to say that there aren't a lot of pain points and hurdles to get over in doing so. As you said at the beginning of this call, it's a very ambitious thing we're trying to tackle, but we believe fundamentally in it. So we just keep chipping away.
Of course, and you know, challenges will always pop up, and if there weren't any challenges, then you would not have a business on your hands. I mean, challenge and business go hand in hand with each other. I think where I'd like to sort of end off, but we can, you know, touch on anything else that you think we might have missed. But I really want to stress some of the benefits of being a freelancer, and actually working for founders, working in a small agency environment, as you say, that might change, that the team might change, different people, different projects, because someone might be sitting at a job now and, you know, they might be contemplating. And some of the biggest advantages that I've seen is being able to firstly have a much larger impact on whatever project you're working on, right? You're not in a massive company working on the small little subset of something. You are actually working directly with founders, working with the people who are making the decisions, and that drives faster change, and the project also progresses faster. So if you enjoy working in a fast-paced type of environment, or something with a lot more stimulation, like myself, then it's great for you.
Yeah.
Anything else that's come up for you in that regard?
No, but it kind of leads on to what you were saying now, and that my younger sister is now looking for her first job. She's just graduated and she's been asking me for sort of help in terms of direction. And this experience with Rafiki and creating this agency as one of the verticals of Rafiki, I think has made me realize that working for an agency for your first few years of your career is probably one of the greatest things you could potentially do. And I wish that I had done it, because let's say if my sister goes and works for a sector agnostic agency in Cape Town, she's going to be exposed to multiple different disciplines within the agency across design, development, creative strategy, socials, whatever it is. And she's going to shadow all of those positions to really start fleshing out, you know, maybe she studied digital strategy, but actually she wants to move into UI design because that looks really cool. And at that stage of your career, it's still so early and you can make those moves. I think there's too much pressure on, you know, you study this, so you need to work in that. And at the same time, within that agency, you'd get exposed to a host of really different sector agnostic, super interesting clients, which may also necessitate some sort of, or sort of have some sort of decisive factor on the fact that you may want to go work in fintech or to go work in wellness or whatever it is, based on your experience on those clients. So I think, that point you brought up is 100% spot on in terms of it is fast paced, but being sort of having that access to founders and interesting industries and verticals through either freelancing or as an agency is an awesome opportunity.
Of course, and I mean, so exciting for your sister.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we get to work together at some point. But yeah, I think being exposed to a lot of things early on really helps you to decide, where do I want to go? Like, do I want to
Mm,
specialize? Or do I really enjoy all these different aspects? Then you might be more of an all-round freelancer, right? At the
mm,
end of the day. But word of advice to those people, as someone who's gone through it and burnt out, I'm pretty sure you might have experienced a similar thing. You need to learn to understand yourself, understand your body, know how much you can take,
mm,
and know where your boundaries are, and really establish those. And yeah, I do think Rafiki probably will help a lot with that as well, right? That sort of monitoring aspect, putting people on projects that are right for them,
mm.
and not just throwing people to the wolves, but
Exactly.
fostering talent a bit more.
100%. And there's a need for that. I think we've spoken about the speed of technological change and how that's been amazing for solo entrepreneurs and freelancers. But also, what that means is the shelf life for these hard skills decreases. So, the qualitative side of things, the ability to communicate, the ability to regulate your workloads and manage yourself, the more qualitative side of why you would hire someone has become increasingly important, I think. So I would say working on that, ensuring that regardless of how good you are at your chosen task or domain, work on the softer skills as well. And as you say, have a bit of a support network and be really introspective in terms of handling your own stress, because at the end of the day, if you're freelancing, you are in effect an entrepreneur and you don't want to do it on your own. Try band together with a few mates, collaborate a bit more, create your own agency, whatever it is, or work under someone, such as yourself, who's a more senior designer who can nurture you through all of those pain points to really fast track your ability to become senior.
Excellent advice. Listen to that. But we'd love to hear more from,
Mm.
and I think what we'll do is, this is the first conversation of many that we'll have with freelancers and founders to really dive deeper and understand what makes them tick and what to look out for. So, yeah, thanks, Greg, for this conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to mention you think we did not touch on today?
No, I think this has been a great chat. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, hopefully there's some subsequent conversations because there's definitely more we can dig into. But this has been awesome. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, hey. Stay well and good luck, everyone.
Cheers, Paul. Ciao.